Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. How long do you get to say Happy New Year? Can you say Happy New Year all through the month of January? I think so. Good morning again. Welcome to the first edition of Purpose Amplified in 2024. For those who may not be familiar, I launched this live stream last year because I firmly believe that we all have a purpose. It's just some of us may not have found it yet, some of us have found it, and a purpose and a mission to make an impact on whether it's on our local communities or on our global communities. And I wanted an opportunity to feature wonderful, amazing people and organizations that I am fortunate enough to know or have come across who are doing just that, amplifying their purpose and mission in our world. And today I'm so excited to feature Beth Mund, who is not only the host of the Casual Space podcast, but is also the founder and executive director of Stories of Space, of the Stories of Space project. And we will be talking about what that project is. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring her on. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Anne. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I'm always like, how long do you get to say that, right? Like through the whole month of January?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
and then the cool thing is, in the Asian culture, I have one more New Year to celebrate, and that's not till the
True.
middle of February. So I'm going to keep saying Happy New Year for a while.
It's on my voicemail on my phone, and I've been told not to take it off. So let's keep going.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out and being on the show today. And in full disclosure, everyone, Beth is a client of mine and also, I'm lucky to say, a friend. And I am so excited to be able to really feature Stories of Space project and share what it is, because I think it's just an amazing, amazing project. And I'll let you take it away. I'd love for you to introduce yourself briefly to the audience and the viewers.
Well, I'm Beth Mund. I am a former NASA employee, civil servant, and all official. And my years at NASA were beyond inspiring. And I had worked a whole career to get to NASA. So when I finally did, it was like a kid in a candy store. Every assignment I got, everything I did was just super fun. It was such a joy to be at the Johnson Space Center in Texas, especially coming from the Midwest where we didn't have access to space. We're not coastal. We don't have a lot of space in our museums in the Midwest, and we don't regularly see launches. So this was very foreign to me. But the stories about space were very, very near and dear to my heart. And it was the way in which I could connect to space by following the autobiographies of the astronauts, by following the trials and tribulations and challenges of the space program, from the history of it to the present day, which at the time was the shuttle program and the building and assembly of space stations. So that's what I did at NASA. And then after I left NASA to pursue my career and get married and start a family and do all the things, had this tug on my sleeve that was still very space related. And I would find a lot of people that would invite me into their NASA story. So many people have a space story, whether it's their own or someone they know or something they read or something they enjoyed. Some of it's science fiction and some of it was very real. So these stories would be shared with me, and they were never written down. They were never reported. They never went anywhere except from their mouth to my ears. And I thought, that is such a shame that they are never going to be passed on,
Yeah.
because some of them were pretty impressive. Like, I know folks who have shared with me that their families had worked on the original Apollo program, or that they had friends and colleagues that made parts that were part of the shuttle. And they were so full of pride and energy and happiness. But again, and you could see this when they were sharing their story about it, but it just didn't land anywhere outside of the moment I shared with them. So I started the podcast, and the podcast grew and grew. And I had the joy of putting some folks in the industry on the show. And soon I thought, well, this is fantastic. How else can I put stories together? And that is how the Stories of Space project started.
I love it. And coming from Houston and growing up in Houston and having NASA be such an ever present, iconic organization in my backyard, of course, the school kids love space, love the stories. We had a field trip to NASA every year. Anytime we had visitors,
Wow.
people wanted to go to NASA, right? Because that's an amazing thing. And I kind of took it for granted that it was in my own backyard. And so I love the fact that you have shared that you growing up in the Midwest, you really didn't have access to that. It wasn't something that was easily attained. And then, as you graduated from college, started your career, you were looking forward to working at NASA. And I think there are many people who aspire to do that. And I love that you were able to do so. And I wanted to bring this point up. You are not an astronaut, you are not an engineer, but you were still able to have a really great career affiliated with NASA. And would you share a little bit about that?
Yes, and I should start by saying Space Camp started for me. Everything, all the doors that opened were because when I went to Space Camp in high school, I was not that young. Space Camp, you can be quite young. You can also go with your family. You can go with your friends and colleagues, or you can just go. Even as an adult, you can go to Space Camp. And when I did, everything changed because I knew there was a place where interested students like me were able to study space. And so, for those of us again in the Midwest, or perhaps not on the coasts where space is part of an industry, we didn't know that there was all kinds of careers and opportunities for us. But I was introduced to that at Space Camp. So shortly after camp, and I went back to be a Space Camp counselor, I just kept pursuing how can I be in the industry? And of course, NASA is one of the, at the time, the epitome of being in the industry. Now we have commercial space programs and projects and companies where so many people are hired and it's growing. It's going to be $1 trillion business in 2030. And there's lots of opportunity, but at the time there really wasn't. So I had applied many times to NASA. I had gotten rejected many times from NASA. And it wasn't until I had this corporate science writing job at Motorola, which was highly technical, that I was able to find the perfect fit for me, which was to come in at NASA as a writer and a science writer for the public affairs office at Johnson.
No, that's awesome. And the fact that you didn't give up on that dream and you kept, applying and going after it until you achieved it. So, inspiration for us all. You mentioned that there was all these stories that you heard from people, and it didn't go beyond just you hearing the story. And so you wanted to, I know your mission, or you were inspired to share these stories with everyone. But what made you decide to share it by sending it into space? What inspired that?
Well, space is just pretty cool, right? And we all want to
Yes,
get
it
there
is.
someday. So as I was gathering these stories, it really kind of sparked when a wonderful woman named Stephanie Murphy, who works there in Houston at a company called Aegis Aerospace. And Stephanie is a leader in the aerospace community, and she had NASA in her background all her life as well. Her father had worked for NASA, and she had always been able to be a part of the industry. So as she built Aegis and she started putting things into space, because NASA can only do so much, they're limited by payload space. So when another company can step in and have extra space and extra payload, you can imagine the long list of waiting clients and customers who have experiments and academics and all kinds of research that they want to get to space. So Stephanie's company helps access space in a unique way. And she came on the podcast. We had a wonderful conversation about being a leader in the space industry, being a female in a very highly pressured, fast moving, ever evolving industry, and what that was like. And when it ended, she invited me to fly something into space. And I took that invitation very face value at first and thought that was very kind of her to offer. I mean, that is her business.
Yeah.
And as I thought about it over the nights and days, I thought, what thing would I fly if I had the opportunity? I mean, think about it. You know, you're limited to weight and size, can't be very big.
Mhm.
But what would be that one thing that you would put into space? And I thought about it quite a bit. And selfishly, I'm like, ooh, you can put a family heirloom, a photo, perhaps a
Yes,
piece of
of course.
jewelry. Right. But at the end of the day, the only person who would know that something flew to space would be me. And then what are you gonna do? Walk around and tell people like, "Hey, excuse me, this is flown. This has been to space." It just didn't seem to fit with
Yeah.
my purpose and my mission, which is to involve everyone. So I went back to Stephanie and I said, "What if through the podcast, we take all the stories so far that people have shared and put them into space?" And we started that discussion. I put a project pitch together. I met with Stephanie and she loved it. So, micro SD cards are currently storing over 300 stories right now on the International Space Station as we speak.
That is amazing. And when did that launch?
August 1st last year, it was so exciting. It was on the Antares rocket, which is part of a Cygnus payload, and
Mhm.
that launched at NASA Wallops facility off the East Coast August 1st. The weather was perfect. The launch was unbelievable, and it was right at dusk. So it was one of those moments where the sky was getting gray and kind of full of the beautiful colors of sunset, but by the time it actually launched, it was almost dark, like almost dark black, pitch black dark. So you had the colors of the sunset coming onto the rocket, and then when the rocket launched, it lit up the sky, and it
Oh
was
my
the most gorgeous launch I've ever seen.
god. That sounds amazing. It was almost like the universe told you, "This is right. This is it. You were meant to do this." Now, I know you have a fun story
Mhm.
about going to see the launch. You and your family, went to see this happen, right?
Oh,
So would
yeah.
you yeah, would you share this story? Because I was like, "Wow, that's amazing."
We did. We packed up the whole family. We drove all the way from Chicago out to the launch site, and we just got to meet the most incredible people around the launch site. And we had a number of our team from the Stories of Space come from all over the country and join us because, when you tell people about your purpose, and as you know, and when people can relate to it, or when people can feel something with you or feel connected in a really unique way, they want to be a part of it. So we had ambassadors and we had NASA folks. And then we also had Stories of Space academics and people who have been part of this project since day one, including my family. And I should mention, like, because of my husband, we have this beautiful photo that's on the website in our video where we had laptop after laptop on the dining room table right behind me, just totally running all the stories, getting them onto the card so that they'd be ready for space like weeks before. It was an ultimate high pressure countdown where I'm like, this is a NASA payload. It's official. So we had to get it to NASA many, many, many weeks prior to the launch. It got packed and loaded into the carrier. And I always tell people the Stories of Space started on my dining room table. And when they come back from space, I'm going to put them right back on my dining room table.
We need to get a photo of the SD cards on the dining room table. How
Yes.
it started and how it's going now,
Why
right?
not? People, isn't that a conversation starter? I'll be like, what a beautiful table setting. What's this in the middle? That's a flown SD card.
What? No, that would be a great story, right? Because you think about it, the things that you put on your dining room table, no one would ever think about an SD card that has flown in space housing 300 stories.
I'll put it in a floral arrangement around, like in a see-through container, like on a candelabra, just right at the top of the table. It'll be
And there you
perfect.
go. So when are the stories anticipated to return to Earth?
Yeah.
And what will you be doing with the SD cards aside from
Well,
leaving it on your dining room table?
right? Well, first I get to come and see you and visit down in Houston because I have to come back and pick up the stories. So they'll be on a long, long journey. First, they have to land literally and come back from space. So this is what's neat. They've never been inside the space station. They've purposefully been outside the space station.
Oh,
And this is a good thing because we want them to get truly radiation damage. I'm hoping those stories, those SD cards are damaged. And most people will be like, wait, why? Why would you want that? Well, because we're not just sharing stories and accessing stories and doing a whole bunch of other things, including increasing science literacy and giving people access to space through their story. We are also doing an experiment and applying science to this opportunity. So
mhm,
these micro SD cards are really the future of space. When we are going to have access to space right now today, what it means is that we're going to be able to store data from space that we'll be able to use and retrieve here on Earth. Things about how our climate is changing,
mhm,
how our population is growing, how weather is affecting the planet, and all kinds of things that we take advantage of from space and we store as a data, mostly in these micro SD chips that are on small satellites and cargo and payloads like the Cygnus rocket. So ours is unique because it's got to go to International Space Station. And because it's been up there for so long, it will have some radiation damage.
mhm.
Most microchips and microelectronics will have in space radiation damage, but
Uh,
they're also protected mostly, or they're made to be pretty hardy,
yeah.
but because they are inexpensive right now and a very great investment, a lot of space companies can back it up with many SD cards. So if one fails, you can afford to put several into your satellite. And most satellites don't go quite as high or
Mhm.
as long as the International Space Station micro SD cards that will be exposed. So when we get those cards back and we see how many of those cards got damaged,
Mhm.
that's going to be a great new story to tell on how micro SD electronics can be made better or manufactured to protect them for data, long-term data storage when we go to space.
Oh, I love that. And so, okay, manufacturers of SD cards, here's your chance, right, to get this data, this information to help improve your product. So there's another purpose for your mission, not just sharing the stories of space, which I think is so cool. Because if I were one of the storytellers who got to send my story to space, I'd be walking around saying, my story is flying around in space
Yes.
right now, attached to the International Space Station, but this does have a scientific and technical purpose, as you mentioned. So you've got a duo purpose here. Um, Reading about the stories of space, and I'm going to put your URL up again for those who
Thank
are
you.
interested in learning more about stories of space. I have been a Star Wars and Star Trek fan, so I kind of consider myself a space geek, space enthusiast.
Yay.
And I've long thought, oh, looking at all the training and things that the astronauts have to do, I was like, I can't even ride a roller coaster. So I don't think I'd be able to go into space. But having something that I've created, having an opportunity to send it to space is amazing, right? And you've mentioned access to space a couple of times. So I love the fact that you have this model, this Jedi model, which you shared on your website, excuse me. So would you share a little bit more about what this Jedi model is?
Yes. So this is something that allows all people from everywhere, all over the world, to have this unique access to space. So, what is your story? What do you want it to be? Do you want it to be something very real? I have had the privilege of reading some of these story samples, and they are as goofy and inspiring and non-traditional and fun and medical. I mean, there's so many focused stories
Yeah.
that people, when they feel that connection to space, everyone has a different experience. Some people are in the field and they want their story about space to be very future forward, very
Mhm.
purposeful, very innovative, and they want that story to get out there so that they put something into the universe that they hope will come to fruition. It's amazing, and that's the power of story. Then and these include stories about when we talk about how we're going to access space in the next 5 to 10 years, we're talking about medicine, we're talking about space-based careers, we're talking about propulsion systems, and we're talking about habitats. And all of those themes are within the stories that I get to read and that are submitted from all over the world. And then we have all kinds of stories that are creative and funny. We've got students who are in class with their teachers that are thinking about space in unique ways. And of course, I've had a dinosaur in a story about space, of course.
I think there was a fox too, right? There
There
was a
was a
story of a
fox.
fox in space.
Yes. I have had students I have a very special story that, as you know, Anne, we shared at my 200 Live podcast episode that we highlighted about a young lady from Colorado who found out that she had diabetes. And she wrote a whole story about it on how this young person who also had diabetes would go to space and discover that by going to space, it helped her manage and understand better her diabetes. It was the most beautifully inspirational story. And I think that's what space gives us because it's still an undiscovered frontier. We're free to write our own narrative of how we see ourselves as humans in a new frontier. When's the last time we said we could do that? So when I give people, when the Stories of Space Project gives people this opportunity, they are coming up with truly fun and inspirational stories. And Anne, let's not be remiss. I also have lyrics. You talked about your love of Star Wars and
Yeah,
Star Trek.
yeah.
I have Star Trek lyrics
Oh
that are
my
flying
gosh.
to space right now because they were submitted from a band that is a Star Trek cover band. So
I
it's
love it.
limitless, the opportunities to have some fun when you talk about stories in space.
I think the opportunities are limitless, as you mentioned, because it is a still unexplored frontier, and both imaginative and inspiring, as you mentioned. And I love the fact that it offers an opportunity for people to access space, as you have mentioned a couple of times as well. Because how else would we be able to have that access if we weren't able to share a story? So when are we able to submit for your next mission? And when is your next mission?
Oh, it's so thank you for asking. There's so many things that are coming up this year that are going on right now. If you submit a story right now, your story is on mission number 2. Mission number 1 is currently on station right now. That's our very first set of stories. They're flying on station. They'll be back in late March, maybe April. But if you submit for mission number 2, your story will go and fly on a zero G plane in microgravity, which is super cool. And that'll happen later this year. And we are just about to announce, and you're getting the very first announcement, mission number 3, which
Yay!
is going to be a suborbital flight with our partners, Maritime Space Launch Systems in
Wow.
Nova
Congratulations.
Scotia, Canada. Yes. So watch the space on storiesofspace.com. Watch our website because literally at the end of January, we will be releasing and opening the story window for mission number 3. So you actually have a choice. Your stories can, or you can do both. You can submit your stories to a microgravity environment with zero G on a plane, or you can send your stories into suborbital flight. Both are happening later this year, and you can submit them. You can submit your story on both. So you don't actually have to choose. You can submit as many times as you like.
Oh, that's awesome. So storiesofspace.com to submit your story. It's open now. But also, there's an exciting announcement I know you have aside from Mission 3, because Stories of Space needs the support to be able to send all these wonderful stories into space. You have applied to be a nonprofit, and right now we're just waiting on confirmation from
Yes.
your paperwork, right?
Yes, yes. I'm so grateful. This is going to allow us to receive the NSF grants and so many other major supporters, including all of you. And here's what's great: when you submit your story, no matter what your age is, your background, where you're from, your story flies for free. For free. And it's so much fun when you do the prompts and you go through the easy questions that just say your first name and your email and your story. That's all. Then you can have a lot of fun and share a lot of creative ideas right here that you know are going to space for free. So when we do this, as a non for profit, we do need donations, we do need sponsors, and we do need your support. So, should you feel so moved by a project like this, you just go to storiesofspace.com and make your donation. It can be anything from $1 to tens of thousands of dollars. And we really get to do a lot of big things by accessing space in this truly unique way. And I should add, and that the reason why it's going to be a while before I get to see you and come pick those cards up in Houston is because we have academic partners. We have a lot of other folks who are helping to tell the story about this project and these SD cards. They need to be tested. And then we're going to be taking the data from these stories and sharing them with everyone. So that takes a little bit of time, and it helps us when we're working with universities and academia. And that all takes some funding as well. So we're looking forward to doing all this in 2024 thanks to your support.
Absolutely. So storiesofspace.com, hit that donate button. And I really appreciate the fact that you, again, have continued to make this accessible, because if you're submitting a story, it's free. It's absolutely free. And there's no age limit. You can be any age to submit a story. Is there I guess, a limit on the length of the story or the characters?
3,000 words.
3,000 words. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you'd be
That's
surprised.
important.
It's a good 2.5 pages, really.
Yes, that is.
And I
So
always tell people, if you still want more to be submitted, just submit again.
oh my gosh. Yes. There you go, folks. Storiesofspace.com to submit your story, but also please consider donating so that these missions can continue, because there is a cost to getting the stories into the payload. And the fact that story submitters are not being asked to pay to submit their stories is phenomenal. So I really appreciate that you have kept that accessible for everyone. So if you have a student, you are an adult, anybody out there can submit a story. So please do so. Is there a deadline for the missions? I know we talked about the submissions are open, but I didn't know if there was a deadline.
No, submissions are open as we speak, and you always want to check us out because this year we're doing big missions again. We're hopefully flying twice, and that's a lot in one year. Just flying once in a year would be a fantastic goal. We're doing it twice this year, so check us out. Keep your eyes on storiesofspace.com. Connect with us and walk around after you submit your story and tell everyone that your story is in space. It's your bragging right. You should be proud. This is something that comes from you. And part of the goal of this was to ask people to really sit down and think about what space meant for
Mhm.
them, or what
Mhm.
space in the future means to them personally. So when you sit down and you're creatively engaging and being very thoughtful and typing those words, no matter what age, and I've had so many fun words, it it doesn't matter. There's no one judging what you think your future in space is. It's yours. It's yours to enjoy and ours to fly. And that's our privilege. So please have fun with it. Share it with everyone. Tell your friends and neighbors. Please tell your communities of innovative, kiddos who are really excited about space. This is their opportunity to to seriously walk around and say, my story is in space right now.
That's amazing. And of course, not only are individual donors really important to the mission of Stories of Space, but you are seeking corporate sponsors as well. So if anyone out there is interested in helping to further the mission for Stories of Space and really inspire the next generation of what could be our space explorers, the people working to get us back into space or back to the moon, the next generation of kids who want to be, those space enthusiasts and getting out there and exploring the frontier. Absolutely connect with Beth on LinkedIn. She would love to chat with you about any type of corporate support or sponsorship. And then also, don't forget, if you are a space enthusiast, definitely check out Beth's Casual Space podcast. You can find it on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And then you can also go directly to casualspacepodcast.com as well. She's had over 200 episodes of amazing guests. So would you share a little bit about, just the variety of guests that you've had as we close out the show today?
Oh, thanks, Anne. Yes, astronauts, artists, authors, kids, inspirational folks who have been in the industry, and we all have one thing in common: our mutual love for space and space exploration. So I love when CEOs and leaders and industry executives and influencers get on the show, and we just get to really talk about our love of space, how it started, what we love most. There's no agenda, there's no technical talk. So, all ages, just like the Stories of Space Project, families listen to the podcast together. We have some really funny folks that come on and just we share our laugh about aliens. Sometimes we'll talk about,
We
not
had
very often.
your most recent episode about the UFOs with Sarah Skulls. That was a great episode.
Yes, and she's a very well-researched author, and I never thought in a million years I'd have a podcast that would talk about aliens, especially from my days at NASA. It just was so faux pas. And now it's really coming forward, and I love it because, we talk about SETI, and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and the telescopes, but also Hubble and the latest missions in space and the people who are making space food. Every topic is on the table at Casual Space in a casual conversation that everyone can enjoy and love. So thank you for sharing the podcast. We have a lot of fun doing it.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the fact that it's not technical, right? And again, you're very intentional about making sure that space is accessible to everyone. So that don't be afraid to listen to the podcast because you don't have to be a technical person to appreciate the conversations. And as we close out, I am going to share like one episode that you had recently that I thought really resonated with me, was inspirational. It was Dr. Jan Davis, who is former
Mhm.
astronaut, and she wrote a book kind of highlighting her career with her dad's, who was a pilot in World War II. And for me, it really resonated because at that time I was, I lost my dad a little over a year ago, and just many things, I felt were parallel to what I was feeling about my relationship with my dad. And I loved that episode. I was like bawling as I was listening to it
Oh,
while I was driving on the road. So there are great stories such as that one. So don't be afraid to listen. Again, you don't have to be a technical person to really get a lot out of these conversations. Beth, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I really wanted a chance to feature Stories of Space. I believe in your project and your mission, and I hope that many others will learn more about it by, and then support by submitting stories, as well as considering a financial donation and supporting in that way. So again, you all can support by going to storiesofspace.com. Be sure to follow them on social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. Easy to find, Stories of Space Project. If you would like to connect with Beth, feel free to do so on LinkedIn. She's very easy to find, Beth Mund. It's a great profile photo. I think it's the one of you from your analog astronaut days, right?
yeah.
With the astronaut helmet or the space helmet.
Thank you. Yes.
Love it. And then, of course, Casual Space Podcast on all of your fave podcast platforms. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. If you are catching this on the replay, please feel free to drop a comment or a question, and we'll make sure to get it back to Beth. This has been a wonderful way to start the new year by featuring stories of Space Project and you, Beth, and really helping to amplify the purpose and the mission of what you are bringing to the world.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate it. My purpose is to change the way we explore space, one story at a time.
I love it. Thanks, everyone. Tune in next month. I'll have information about the next guest soon on my social channels.